No, I specifically asked for someone who speaks English. English. Do you understand what I'm saying? The woman's hands didn't shake as she folded the towel, a small miracle, considering the venom dripping from every syllable. She'd heard worse. 23 years of cleaning hotel suites had taught her that wealth didn't purchase manners, only volume. But this particular guest, a tech billionaire whose face graced magazine covers monthly, seemed determined to rewrite the handbook on condescension. "I understand perfectly, sir," she said quietly, her accent carefully neutral. Marcus Chen, worth approximately $14 billion according to the financial press, stood in the doorway of his penthouse suite wearing a bathrobe that probably cost more than her monthly salary. His eyes swept over her uniform with the kind of dismissive appraisal usually reserved for furniture. The presidential suite of the Grand Meridian stretched behind him, all marble and crystal and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that never stopped moving. She'd cleaned this room hundreds of times, watched countless guests come and go, each one believing their wealth made them somehow more significant than the woman holding the vacuum. "Then why are you still here?" His voice carried that particular sharpness that came from a lifetime of never being told no. "I have calls to make, important calls, business that actually matters. I can't have staff lingering around like—" His phone rang, not the subtle vibration of a normal device, but an aggressive electronic trill that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He snatched it from the marble counter, glanced at the screen, and his entire posture shifted. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "I need to take this," he muttered, already turning away. "Just finish whatever you're doing and get out." She nodded and returned to her cart, methodically organizing cleaning supplies while he paced toward the window. The call connected. A rapid stream of Mandarin filled the suite, aggressive, demanding, the kind of tone that suggested whoever was on the other end held significant leverage. She understood every word. Of course she did. But years of experience had taught her that invisible was safer than competent, and silence was armor. Marcus responded in Mandarin, his fluency impressive but his grammar stumbling over complex clauses. He was negotiating something, a deal in Shanghai worth hundreds of millions from the numbers being thrown around. But his pronunciation kept mangling key terms, technical vocabulary that shifted meanings with a single tonal error. The voice on the phone grew increasingly frustrated, and she watched his reflection in the window glass, saw the way his jaw tightened, how his free hand clenched and unclenched. He was losing the deal, right there in his $14,000 per night suite, wearing his silk bathrobe and his billionaire confidence. He was watching a fortune slip away because he couldn't quite grasp the linguistic nuances required to close the transaction. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built a career on being underestimated, on letting people see only what they expected. A middle-aged black woman pushing a cleaning cart, someone to be ignored or dismissed or spoken around as if she were part of the furniture. The conversation deteriorated. Marcus's voice rose, desperation bleeding through his attempted authority. He switched to English, trying to force the negotiation onto familiar ground, but the voice on the other end refused, insisted on Mandarin, and suddenly he was drowning. His billion-dollar education and his Ivy League degrees and his corner office confidence meant nothing against a language barrier he couldn't quite breach. "Wait," he said in English. "Just wait one moment, please." He lowered the phone, stared at it like it had personally betrayed him, and then his gaze swung around the suite, landing on her. Really landing on her, perhaps for the first time since she'd knocked on his door 30 minutes earlier. She kept her expression neutral, continued arranging bottles on her cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago that being unremarkable was a survival skill. "You?" he said. "Do you speak—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. "How many languages do you speak?" The question hung in the air between them. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the way he was reassessing her worth based on entirely new criteria. But she also saw something else, the desperate need of a man watching a massive opportunity disintegrate because of his own limitations. It would have been easy to simply lie, to claim ignorance and finish her work and leave him to his failure. After all, he'd spent the last half hour treating her as though her primary function was to be invisible. But Catherine Morrison hadn't spent 2 decades learning 7 languages and working on her doctorate in international business, just to play small when opportunities presented themselves. Even opportunities wrapped in irony, this delicious. I speak English, Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, French, German, and conversational Arabic, she said, her accent shifting subtly, revealing the education she usually kept hidden beneath her service uniform. Fluently, and I couldn't help but overhear that you're having some difficulty with technical vocabulary regarding semiconductor manufacturing contracts. Marcus's expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, confusion, suspicion, and finally a kind of desperate hope that people probably described as his deal-making face in Forbes profiles. His entire understanding of the situation had just inverted, and she could see him struggling to process the cognitive dissonance of a hotel maid casually discussing complex business terminology in multiple languages. You understood all of that? He gestured toward the phone, still clutched in his hand like a live grenade. The gentleman on the phone is frustrated because you keep confusing Guemu Jingji with Guifan Jingji, economies of scale versus regulatory economy. It's a tonal issue primarily, but also contextual. You're essentially telling him you want to increase government oversight of the manufacturing process when you mean you want to reduce per unit costs through increased production volume. He thinks you're proposing an entirely different business structure. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at her as though she'd suddenly sprouted a second head, his understanding of reality undergoing rapid reconstruction. The phone in his hand buzzed, the other party growing impatient, and he flinched. Can you? He trailed off, pride warring with necessity on his face. Would you be able to? She waited. Let him struggle with it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching a man who dismissed her as irrelevant now forced to ask for help, to acknowledge that she possessed skills he desperately needed. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, subtle but undeniable, and they both felt it. I need help, he finally admitted. This deal is worth $300 million, and I'm about to lose it because of a language barrier. If you can. He stopped again, clearly unaccustomed to requesting rather than demanding. I'll pay you, whatever you want. Just help me close this negotiation. Catherine set down the bottle of glass cleaner she'd been holding. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. She'd spent years being rushed by guests, being treated as though her time was somehow less valuable than theirs. If Marcus Chen wanted her expertise, he could learn patience. The call is on hold? She asked. He nodded frantically. I told him I needed to consult with my linguistic specialist. Your linguistic specialist, she repeated, allowing herself the smallest smile. I see. Please. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, unpracticed. I'm asking for your help. She considered him for a long moment, watching him squirm under her assessment. There were layers to this situation that he couldn't possibly understand, ironies stacked upon ironies, reversals that went far deeper than a simple language barrier. But those would reveal themselves in time. Right now she had leverage, and she intended to use it. I'll help you, she said finally, but we're going to establish some terms first. You're going to sit down, you're going to listen to what I tell you to say, and you're going to say it exactly as I instruct you. No improvising, no second-guessing, no assuming you know better. Your ego has already cost you significant ground in this negotiation. If you want to recover, you defer to my expertise completely. Do you understand? The expression on his face was priceless, a mixture of affront and desperation and grudging respect. Marcus? Chen wasn't accustomed to being given orders by anyone, let alone a hotel employee he'd been trying to dismiss from his suite just minutes earlier. But the phone in his hand represented hundreds of millions of dollars, and his pride, apparently, had a price point. I understand, he said, the words clearly painful. Good. Catherine moved toward the suite's conference table, her cleaning cart forgotten. Then let's begin. And Mr. Chen, you might want to sit down. This is going to take a while, and something tells me you're about to learn several valuable lessons about assumptions. The negotiation that followed lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes. Catherine didn't simply translate. She reconstructed Marcus's entire approach, identifying where his cultural assumptions had created friction, where his limited understanding of Mandarin business idioms had undermined his credibility, where his tone had inadvertently communicated disrespect to a potential partner who valued protocol above almost everything else. She stood beside him at the conference table, speaking quietly, feeding him phrases that preserved his authority, while repairing the relationship he'd nearly destroyed. The businessman on the other end, Mr. Zhang Wei, chairman of a manufacturing conglomerate based in Shenzhen, responded to the shift immediately. His tone softened. The aggressive posturing gave way to actual negotiation, the kind of productive dialogue that moved deals forward rather than torpedoing them. Marcus, to his credit, followed her instructions exactly. He repeated her words with increasing confidence, his pronunciation improving as she corrected his tonal errors in real time. She caught him glancing at her several times, his expression suggesting he was reassessing not just her linguistic abilities, but everything he'd assumed about her, from the moment she'd knocked on his door with fresh towels. When Mr. Zhang proposed a modification to the profit-sharing structure, Catherine leaned close to Marcus and whispered a rapid analysis in English. "He's testing you. The modification seems generous on the surface, but it shifts currency exchange risk entirely onto your company. Counter with a shared risk model, offered a split exchange rate fluctuation 60-40 in his favor. It shows you understand the complexity and respects his position without accepting unfavorable terms." Marcus delivered the counterproposal flawlessly. Mr. Zhang laughed, actual warm laughter that crackled through the phone's speaker, and called Marcus Geng Kong Ming than he'd initially assumed. Catherine didn't translate the phrase for Marcus, but she smiled slightly. It meant cleverer or more intelligent, and represented a significant breakthrough in the relationship. They worked through technical specifications, delivery schedules, quality control protocols. Catherine recognized immediately when Mr. Zhang employed classical Chinese references to make points about business, philosophy, references that would have sailed completely over Marcus's head without interpretation. She explained each one quietly, giving Marcus the context he needed to respond appropriately, to demonstrate cultural literacy that he absolutely didn't possess on his own. At one point, Mr. Zhang made what sounded like a casual comment about trust and partnership. Catherine's hand shot out, gripping Marcus's wrist before he could respond with his instinctive American-style agreement. She shook her head fractionally. "That wasn't casual," she whispered urgently. "He's invoking guanxi, relationship-based commerce. If you respond casually, you'll insult him. This is a formal invitation to a deeper business relationship. You need to acknowledge the honor he's extending and reciprocate with your own commitment to long-term partnership. Use the phrase I'm about to give you and say it slowly. Every tone matters here." She fed him the words. Marcus delivered them with careful precision. Another pause on the line, and then Mr. Zhang's voice came back warmer still, speaking about his son who was studying at Stanford, about hoping Marcus might mentor the young man when business brought them to California. Personal details, family, the kind of information that, in Chinese business culture, represented significant trust. The deal closed at just past 6 in the evening. $300 million in semiconductor contracts, partnership agreements that would likely generate another billion in related business over the next decade, and the foundation of what Mr. Zhang explicitly called a friendship between companies that transcended simple transactions. When Marcus finally ended the call, he sat motionless for almost a full minute, staring at his phone as though it might disappear if he looked away. Catherine stood quietly, waiting. She'd learned patience the way some people learned languages, through immersion and necessity and years of practice. "I would have lost that," Marcus said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Without you, I would have blown the entire deal in the first 10 minutes. "Yes," Catherine agreed simply. "You would have." He looked up at her, really looked at her, and she saw the wheels turning behind his eyes, the questions forming, the cognitive dissonance demanding resolution. How did a hotel maid speak 7 languages fluently? How did she understand complex business negotiations and cultural protocol and technical terminology? Who was she actually, beneath the uniform and the cart and the assumptions he'd wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket? "Who are you?" he asked. "I mean, really? You're obviously not just a maid," Catherine finished for him, her tone neutral. "Not just anything, Mr. Chen. People are rarely just one thing. But yes, I do clean hotel rooms. It's honest work that pays my bills while I finish my doctorate." Your doctorate, he repeated faintly, in international business, emphasis on cross-cultural communication and negotiation strategies. My dissertation examines how linguistic competence affects corporate diplomacy in East Asian markets. I've been conducting field research by working in service positions at hotels frequented by international business travelers. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about negotiation failures when people assume you don't understand the conversations happening around you. She let that sink in, watched his face as he realized the implications. How many conversations had he had in this suite, assuming privacy, assuming the staff were invisible? How many other guests did the same, never considering that the woman changing their sheets might possess graduate degrees and understand every word of their supposedly confidential discussions? That call, Marcus said slowly. You understood everything from the beginning, the whole negotiation, before I even asked for help. You just stood there folding towels while I was losing millions of dollars. I did, Catherine confirmed. You also spent the first part of my visit making it exceptionally clear that you considered my presence an inconvenience. You wanted me to finish and leave because you had important work to do. Business that actually matters. Those were your exact words, I believe. A flush crept up his neck. I was rude. You were dismissive. There's a difference. Rudeness implies awareness of the other person. You dismissed me, treated me as functionally invisible, someone whose skills and knowledge and humanity were irrelevant to your important billionaire life. She kept her voice level, factual rather than accusatory, but the words still landed with weight. So yes, I understood your conversation, and I made a choice about whether to offer help to someone who'd made it clear my assistance would be unwelcome. But you did help, Marcus said. Eventually? Why? Catherine considered the question. The real answer was complicated. A mixture of professional interest, personal pride, and a certain satisfaction in disrupting his comfortable assumptions about who deserved respect and why. But there was also a simpler truth underneath all of that. Because despite your arrogance, you asked, she said. When you needed help, you swallowed your pride and requested assistance. You followed instructions from someone you'd dismissed minutes earlier. That showed capacity for growth, which is more than many people demonstrate. And frankly, the negotiation was fascinating from an academic perspective. I couldn't resist. Marcus stood, moved to the window overlooking the city. Twilight had descended while they worked, transforming the skyline into a constellation of lit windows. He stood silent for a long moment, and Catherine saw his reflection processing, recalibrating, struggling with an understanding of the world that had just shifted beneath his feet. I need to hire you, he said finally. Excuse me? Hire you, immediately. I have deals pending in 8 countries. My company is expanding into markets where cultural intelligence isn't optional. It's everything. And he turned to face her. I just proved spectacularly that I don't have that intelligence. You do. Name your price. Catherine had anticipated many possible responses to the afternoon's events, but this wasn't among them. She studied Marcus Chen carefully, looking for the catch, the angle, the inevitable moment where his ego would reassert itself, and he'd attempt to minimize what had actually happened here. You realize I'm still working on my doctorate, she said. I can't accept full-time employment. Consultant then, contract work, whatever arrangement works for you. Catherine, he stopped, blinked. I don't even know your last name. Morrison, Catherine Morrison. Dr. Morrison, not yet. Ms. Morrison for another 18 months until my dissertation is defended. Ms. Morrison, he corrected. I employ thousands of people. Most of them have impressive degrees and impeccable credentials and absolutely perfect resumes. And in 3 hours, you demonstrated more value than most of them provide in a year. You saved a $300 million deal. More importantly, you taught me things about negotiation and cultural intelligence that I absolutely should have known, but didn't. That's worth whatever compensation you want to name. The offer was tempting. Catherine would have been lying if she claimed otherwise. Doctoral candidates didn't typically turn down 6-figure consulting opportunities, especially not when they came with the chance to apply research directly to high-stakes situations. But something in Marcus's tone still bothered her. The underlying assumption that money could simply paper over the way he'd treated her, could transform dismissiveness into respect through the magic of a salary offer. Why did you assume I only spoke English? She asked, Earlier, when you were complaining about me being here, you specifically said you wanted staff who spoke English, with that particular emphasis that suggested you assumed I didn't. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. You had an accent. I just assumed that someone with an accent must have limited English proficiency, despite the fact that I'd already spoken to you in perfectly fluent, grammatically correct English when I explained what services I'd be providing. You heard an accent and made assumptions about my competence. Yes, he admitted quietly, I did. And my uniform, my appearance, the fact that I was pushing a cleaning cart, all of that contributed to your assessment that I was someone whose presence was an inconvenience rather than someone who might possess valuable skills or knowledge. Yes, he said again. Catherine appreciated the honesty at least. Many people would have deflected, made excuses, attempted to reframe their bias as simple miscommunication. Marcus was at least owning his assumptions, which suggested genuine discomfort with his own behavior, rather than mere embarrassment at being caught. I'll consider your offer, she said. But I want you to understand something first. This afternoon wasn't just about language skills or cultural knowledge. It was about recognition, about seeing people fully rather than filtering them through your preconceptions about who matters and who doesn't. You employ thousands of people, you said. How many of them do you actually see? How many possess skills and knowledge that you've never bothered to discover because you've already decided what they're capable of based on their job titles or their appearance or their accents? The question clearly struck something deep. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, struggled with an answer that wouldn't come. Catherine pressed forward. Your entire company is probably filled with people like me, individuals whose capabilities far exceed your assumptions about them. People who could be contributing at levels you've never imagined if someone would just bother to ask what they know instead of telling them what you think they should be doing. That's not just a hiring problem, Mr. Chen. That's a leadership problem, and it's probably costing you more than you realize. She let that settle before continuing. So, if you want to hire me, if you genuinely want my expertise, then I need to know you understand the real lesson from this afternoon. It's not Catherine Morrison speaks Mandarin, and I should pay her for that skill. It's I've been fundamentally wrong about how I assess people's worth, and I need to rebuild my entire approach to recognizing talent and competence. Marcus absorbed this, his expression suggesting he was experiencing the kind of profound discomfort that preceded genuine change. Or, at least, Catherine hoped that was what she was seeing. She'd witnessed enough performative epiphanies from wealthy men to maintain healthy skepticism about whether insight translated to action. You're right, he said finally, about all of it. I've built a multi-billion-dollar company by surrounding myself with the best people, or so I thought. But I've been selecting the best people from an incredibly narrow range of possibilities. People who look like me, sound like me, come from similar backgrounds. I've been optimizing for comfort and familiarity rather than actual competence. And it never even occurred to me that I might be missing extraordinary talent because I wasn't looking in the right places or asking the right questions. He moved back to the conference table, sat down heavily. This afternoon humbled me, genuinely. I came within minutes of destroying a deal worth hundreds of millions because I was too arrogant to recognize my own limitations. And the person who saved me, who possessed exactly the expertise I needed, was someone I'd tried to rush out of the room because I'd already decided her presence was an inconvenience. That's not just embarrassing, it's terrifying. How many other opportunities have I missed because of similar blindness? How many talented people have I overlooked or dismissed or underutilized because they didn't fit my preconceptions? Catherine pulled out a chair and sat across from him. They were no longer billionaire and maid, employer and service worker. They were two people having an honest conversation about assumptions and recognition and the cost of bias. In my research, she said, I've documented hundreds of cases where corporations failed international negotiations because of cultural incompetence. Usually it's attributed to communication breakdowns or unforeseen complications. But the real cause is almost always the same. Organizations that don't recognize expertise when it exists outside traditional hierarchies. The translator who could have prevented a diplomatic disaster if anyone had asked their opinion. The local employee who understood market dynamics better than the imported consultant. The administrative assistant who speaks 4 languages and has a master's degree but gets paid to schedule meetings. She paused, making sure he was following. Talent is everywhere, Mr. Chen. Absolutely everywhere. But recognition of talent is scarce, especially across lines of race, class, gender, age, and perceived status. The same skill set that makes someone valuable in your eyes when they're wearing a suit and carrying a business card becomes invisible when that person is wearing a uniform and pushing a cart. The expertise doesn't change, only your willingness to see it. So, how do I fix that? Marcus asked. Not just in terms of hiring you, but systemically. How do I rebuild my approach to recognizing talent in ways that don't depend on credentials and appearances and all the shortcuts I've been using? The question pleased her. It suggested genuine engagement rather than performative interest. Catherine leaned forward. You start by interrogating every assumption you make about people's capabilities. When you meet someone new, especially someone in a service position or a role you consider lower status, you consciously ask yourself, what might this person know that I don't? What skills might they possess that aren't obvious from their job title? What experiences have shaped their expertise in ways I can't immediately see? You make recognition a practice rather than an accident. She continued, then you create systems that reveal hidden expertise. Regular surveys asking employees at all levels what skills they possess beyond their job descriptions. Rotation programs that allow people to demonstrate capabilities in different contexts. Compensation for knowledge sharing that doesn't depend on formal credentials. You make space for people to be more than what you initially assumed they were. Marcus was listening intently, occasionally nodding. Catherine could see him mentally cataloging changes, already strategizing implementation. The billionaire's instinct, identify problem, devise solution, execute with resources, wasn't entirely bad. It just needed to be directed at the right targets. And most importantly, Catherine said, you accept that this work is never finished. Bias isn't something you fix once and move on from. It's something you continuously challenge, question, and work against. You'll make mistakes. You'll catch yourself falling back into old patterns. The question is whether you'll notice when it happens and correct course, or whether you'll decide you've solved the problem and stop paying attention. I want to do this right, Marcus said, not just with you, but across the entire organization. Will you help me? Not just as a consultant on international negotiations, but as someone who can teach my leadership team, how to actually see people instead of assumptions. The offer had evolved into something Catherine hadn't anticipated. This was no longer just a lucrative consulting gig. It was an opportunity to implement her research at scale, to test whether genuine organizational change was possible when leadership was willing to engage honestly with their own biases. I'll help, she said, on one condition. Name it. You don't get to use me as a shield. Hiring me doesn't absolve you of doing the hard work of examining your own behavior and the systems you've built. I'm not here to make you feel better about past mistakes or to serve as proof that you're one of the good ones who employs diverse talent. I'm here to do real work, helping your company succeed in international markets while also challenging the assumptions that limit your organizational effectiveness. That means I'll tell you things you don't want to hear. I'll point out when your leadership team is replicating the same patterns we're trying to change. I'll be uncomfortable to have around sometimes. If you want someone who just nods and collects a paycheck, hire someone else. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I absolutely want someone uncomfortable to have around. Comfortable is what got me into trouble in the first place. They shook hands across the conference table. Catherine felt the significance of the moment, the strange journey from dismissed service worker to respected consultant that had unfolded across a single afternoon. But she also felt the weight of what came next, the hard work of transforming insight into action, of proving that recognition could be more than performative, that systems could actually change when people committed to the discomfort of genuine growth. I'll draft a contract proposal, Marcus said. Compensation, terms, scope of work. Whatever you need to make this viable alongside your doctoral work. When can you start? I need to give notice to the hotel, 2 weeks minimum. I won't leave them short-staffed. He looked surprised. You're actually going to keep working here for 2 more weeks? I can pay you more in those 2 weeks than you'd make in a year of hotel work. I made a commitment to them, Catherine said simply. They've been flexible about my schedule. accommodating my research needs. I'm not going to repay that by walking away without proper notice just because something better came along. Besides, the next 2 weeks will give you time to reflect on what you actually want from this arrangement, whether you're genuinely committed to systemic change or whether this afternoon's humility will fade once the sting wears off. You think I'm going to change my mind? Marcus asked. I think you're riding an emotional high from closing a major deal and experiencing a significant challenge to your worldview. Those feelings are powerful, but they're not permanent. In 2 weeks, once you're back in your regular routines, surrounded by people who tell you you're brilliant, you might decide that bringing in someone who questions your assumptions isn't actually that appealing. The waiting period protects both of us, gives you time to be certain, and gives me time to assess whether you're serious about this work or just having a momentary crisis of conscience. Marcus considered this, then nodded slowly. That's fair, and frankly, the fact that you're not jumping at the money makes me trust you more. Shows me you have principles beyond compensation, which is exactly what I need. Catherine stood, straightened her uniform. I should finish my work here. You have a suite that still needs cleaning, and I have responsibilities to fulfill. You're going to finish cleaning? Marcus sounded incredulous. After everything that just happened, you're going to vacuum and dust and make the bed? I am, because that's my job today, and I take my work seriously regardless of what else is happening. You should appreciate that. After all, you're about to hire me specifically because I do excellent work even when people assume I'm not capable of it. She returned to her cart, gathered supplies, and proceeded to clean the presidential suite with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to every room. Marcus watched her work for a few minutes, clearly uncertain whether to leave or stay, whether to keep talking or give her space. Eventually, he retreated to the bedroom area to make phone calls, but she could hear the different tone in his voice, more thoughtful, less imperious, as though their conversation had shifted something fundamental in how he engaged with the world. When she finished, Catherine knocked lightly on the bedroom door. Marcus emerged, now dressed in casual clothes, looking far more human than the arrogant billionaire who'd answered the door hours earlier. "Suite's finished," she reported. "Is there anything else you need?" "Just—" He paused. "Thank you. For the help with the negotiation, obviously. But also for the honesty, for not letting me get away with being dismissive, for teaching me things I should have already known. Today was humbling and uncomfortable and exactly what I needed." Catherine smiled. "You're welcome. And Mr. Chen, that discomfort you're feeling, get used to it. If you're serious about this work, it's going to be a permanent companion. The question is whether you'll embrace it or retreat from it." "I'll embrace it," he said, "or at least I'll try. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll talk about contracts and scope of work and how to build systems that actually recognize talent instead of simply replicating privilege. It's going to be challenging work." "I'm looking forward to it," Marcus said, and she believed he meant it. Catherine wheeled her cart out of the presidential suite and down the hall toward the service elevator. Her shift wasn't over. She still had 3 more rooms to clean before the end of the day. But as she worked through the remaining suites, her mind was already cataloging research observations, drafting proposals, imagining how to translate an afternoon's worth of unexpected developments into meaningful organizational change. She'd spent years studying how assumptions shaped business outcomes, how bias limited organizational effectiveness, how talent went unrecognized when it appeared in unexpected packages. Today she'd lived that research in concentrated form, experienced the full cycle from dismissal to recognition to opportunity. The question now was whether Marcus Chen would prove capable of sustaining the transformation he'd begun, whether his discomfort would catalyze genuine change or simply fade into comfortable old patterns once the initial impact wore off. Catherine wasn't naive. She knew that individual moments of recognition didn't automatically translate into systemic change, that good intentions without structural support usually withered under the pressure of established norms. But she also knew that transformation had to start somewhere, with someone willing to acknowledge their own limitations, to sit with uncomfortable truths, to accept guidance from unexpected sources. Whether Marcus Chen would prove equal to that challenge remained to be seen. But for the first time in her academic career, Catherine had the opportunity to find out, to test whether the theories she'd developed in years of research could actually reshape how an organization recognized and valued human capability. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of normal routines, cleaning rooms, attending classes, working on her dissertation. But Catherine also used the time to research Marcus's company thoroughly, identifying potential entry points for the work they'd discussed, mapping the organizational culture she'd be navigating, preparing herself for the complexity of implementing change at scale. Marcus, for his part, didn't disappear into his previous patterns. He called twice during the 2 weeks, not to pressure her, but to ask questions, thoughtful questions about bias recognition, about creating feedback systems, about how to make his leadership team receptive to uncomfortable conversations. The calls suggested genuine engagement, and Catherine found herself cautiously optimistic that he might actually follow through on his commitments. When she finally walked into Marcus Chen's corporate headquarters 2 weeks later, no longer wearing a hotel uniform, but dressed in professional attire that commanded different assumptions, she felt the full weight of what she was attempting. Changing one person's perspective was difficult. Changing an organization's culture was exponentially harder. But if she succeeded, if she could help build systems that recognized talent regardless of how it was packaged, that valued competence over comfort, that saw people fully rather than through the distorting lens of bias, then perhaps her research could contribute something meaningful beyond academic publications. Marcus met her in the lobby personally, extending his hand with obvious respect. "Dr. Morrison, or still Ms. Morrison for a few more months, welcome. I'm ready to be uncomfortable if you're ready to make me so." Catherine shook his hand firmly. "Then let's get to work, Mr. Chen. We have a lot to change." And they did.